Hello everyone, it's Mystic Juicer here today to bring you another episode of Getting Good at Yomi. Today we're going to cover one of the foundational concepts of good and solid Yomi play. This is probably the most valuable lesson for any new player of Yomi to learn, besides episode 1 and episode 2, which covered how to pick a combat option and when not to follow through. So this week we're going to be covering valuation. What is valuation and why should you care? In its simplest and broadest form, valuation is knowing which cards in your character's deck are better or worse than others. So I hear you going like, yeah, duh, obviously. But there's a lot of nuance here that makes this a much trickier subject than you might think. For instance, you might be able to name your character's best attack or your character's best throw, but what's your character's best block? If you think about your main or your favorite character, what is their best block? If this question is confusing to you, like all blocks are the same, so how could one be better than another? Or you're having trouble thinking of which one it could be, you have an inkling that there might be differences, then that's probably an indication that valuation is either a new concept to you or you need to spend a lot more time looking at your character guide. So this whole series, these series of episodes are about getting good at Yomi, and how does valuation do that? Knowing your best block, your best dodge, your best throw, and best attacks is key to understanding your character. We touched on this somewhat in the episode 4, How to Study a Matchup. So if you haven't checked out that episode, do that first. We also covered a lot of the concepts that we're going to get more in depth with this week in episode 1, which is how to choose a combat option. So concept of not throwing, attacking, or dodging when you have no strong payoff for doing so is a part of valuation-based play, but it's not where valuation ends. There's a lot more to it than that. So I would recommend, if this is your first episode that you're listening to, put this on pause, go and check out episode 1, episode 2, and episode 4. So valuation is an understanding of the resources in your character's deck and using that context and that information to understand the value of the cards in your hand and then use that to inform your decision making. So I've got an example hand here that I'm going to take you through. We're going to stick with Grave because he's been our kind of example character throughout. And he's one of the simpler characters in terms of complexity, so we're going to stick with him and use that to illustrate some of these points. So I'm playing Grave, I have a handful of throws and a single 2. So the 2 is quite valuable to me. It's the fastest attack that I can combo into True Power of Storms with, which is a 4-card combo that deals 47 damage, a 2 and 3 aces. Understanding the value of the 2 means that I should keep it in my hand until I have something good to do with it. For instance, combo it into True Power of Storms, or combo it into a 3, 4, and 5 so that I have a straight and build some aces. Currently, it's useless in my hand, but with the right tools, it'll be incredibly useful. So with this hand, I should either pick a throw to play, because it'll deal some damage and knock down my opponent, which puts me in an advantaged state. Or, more likely, I should block to get more cards in hand to make my hand better, to actually put more resources into my hand. Unlocking, for instance, the power of that 2 by getting 3s, 4s, and 5s. For the moment, let's pretend that I want to throw. I decide to throw. So what throw should I play? Grave has abilities on his 7 and his 10, so I probably shouldn't throw with those. His next fastest throw is on his 8, so that is the least risky throw. It's the fastest throw without a valuable alternative use that I can play. His best throw is his 7. So if it's really, really crucial that I land this throw, then I should throw with the 7. But in this example, let's pretend we're early in the game and we're both at very high health, relatively. I would probably throw with the 8. What if I wanted to block? So again, his 7 and 10 have abilities on them, so I don't want to risk them being thrown if I have other options. A block on one card is just as strong as the block on another card, so you really have to value the block in terms of how good the other side of it is. So once I've eliminated the 7 and the 10 from my decision making, that leaves the 8 and the 9. And because we covered the fact that the 8 is more valuable as a throw than the 9 is, then the best block in my hand is a 9. So hopefully that makes things a little clearer. And now you should be getting the sense of what I mean when I talk about valuation as a concept. What if instead of this hand I had 3 8s and a 7 in hand, and I wanted to block? Would you still block with the 8s? At the end of the turn, you can trade those 3 8s for 2 aces. So now you might prefer to block with the 7 and risk it being thrown if it means that next turn, or at the end of this turn, you're going to ditch those 8s and put some more valuable cards, your aces, Grave's incredibly strong aces, in your hand. So it's not a simple of matter of taking out your character's deck list and then just reading through everything and saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, clearly this block is better than the other, and blah, blah, blah. It's informed as well by the state of the game. Your valuation is also going to change based on the character you're facing. So it's impacted by the matchup that you're in. To make this point really clear, let's pretend we're still playing Grave. What if you're playing an opponent like Onimaru? What happens to the value of your 10? So I'd say that our 10 becomes less valuable as an ability and increases in value as a block. So why is that? Onimaru has 3 abilities, but only one that can be countered, General's Armor on his 5 attack. His other abilities are on his ace, and the other one specifically says you can't counter it. So when we play Grave versus Onimaru, we only have a single target for our counterspell. Also, if we look at Onimaru's innate, you can see that it lets him ignore blocks that are equal to or lower ranked than his normal attacks. So the higher the rank of our block, the more valuable it is, because it's more effective. Note, Grave's 9 is still his preferred block in this matchup, for 2 reasons. 1, General's Armor, the ability that Onimaru has on his 5, is a strong ability, and we'd really like to counter it when possible. But secondly, Onimaru doesn't have an attack on his 9. He only has an 8 and a 10 normal attack. Since both Grave's 9 and 10 block beat his 8 attack, and both lose to his 10 attack, we'd still rather block with the 9. But we definitely prefer to block with a 10 than with an 8, or even worse, a 7. So you can see that even the value of blocks can change depending on the circumstances of the matchup. If you follow my suggestions in episode 4, which is how to study a matchup, you'll see that the exercise I went through of ranking both characters' attacks by speed, looking at the maximum, and also the good or acceptable combo damage, is an example and an application of valuation just for attacks. When you're studying a character, you're learning a new character and trying to figure them out, here are some broad questions you should also be asking yourself. What are my preferred blocks? What are my preferred dodges? What are my preferred attacks to combat reveal? What are my preferred throws to combat reveal? And what are my preferred cards to save for following up a successful dodge, or throw, or attack? So the key concept here is that you look at your hand, you identify what your hand can do, what options you have available to you. You compare that to the payoff, the maximum payoff, or the acceptable level of payoff you're willing to accept off your different combat reveals. And then you let your hand play to those strengths. So if we return to this example grave hand, I would never 9-throw here. There's no payoff from a valuation perspective to 9-throwing as opposed to 8-throwing. It is a strictly worse option. So the first time I heard about this concept of valuation, I was actually really upset. I hated the idea that I had, I'd found this cool game, I'd spent months playing online against opponents. I was having a lot of fun, trying to figure out what my opponent was going to do. And then all of a sudden it turns out that they're just playing the best card in their hand at the time? Like, betrayal! Unacceptable! I was actually legitimately angry. Like, I'd been sold this game that was about reading your opponent, and all of a sudden it's not really about that somehow? Here's the secret though. Valuation is the foundation of Yomi. It's what makes it possible to read your opponent. The entire concept of valuation is that playing to your hand, playing to your character's strengths, is better than playing to be unpredictable or unreadable. Playing unpredictably, quote unquote, randomly, is where most people who pick up the game start off. Before you have an understanding of this concept of valuation, that's what you're doing. And valuation will let a player beat someone new to Yomi a huge percentage of the time. I would say probably around 75% of the time. Might be higher or lower, but it's in that ballpark. Valuation is the cornerstone of good play. It's the mark of a competent or mid-level Yomi player. But, and here's the key, playing based on valuation alone gives information to your opponent. So if I see a player, if I'm playing against a player that I know is kind of mid-level skill, and they're playing Grave, and they block with a 7, that tells me something. Would they block with a 7 if they had an 8, 9, or 10 in hand? No. So right there, with a single block reveal, I have a huge amount of information about their hand. And all they did was block. The next turn, I can block with really high confidence, because they probably don't have another throw, or else they would have blocked with it, rather than the 7. And they probably don't want to throw with the 7 anyway, because the 7 is a very valuable card. If that same good player plays a dodge in the first couple of turns, what does that tell me? Again, concept of valuation, the concept of playing to your strengths is you're not going to dodge early game unless you have a really strong payoff off of that dodge. So now I need to start considering, did they start the game with 3 aces in hand? And I need to start considering that fact when I'm choosing my combat reveals. So I'm going to block more. I'm going to use attacks that are faster than 0.4 speed if I have them. I'm going to keep a joker if I have it, to use if they successfully dodge, or if they hit with a normal attack. Or if I don't have a joker, I'm at least going to bluff. When they dodge, when they hit with a normal attack, I'm going to hit a face card down. That early game dodge is a signal to me that they have something really good in hand that they can follow that up with. So hopefully that puts across the point. Once you look at your opponent's plays with an understanding of valuation, through a lens of valuation, you have a way of making much better guesses at their future combat reveals than without valuation. So valuation isn't a betrayal of Yomi, of reading your opponent, abandoning that for cold calculation alone. It's the method you use to make good reads in the first place. Note, I'm saying good reads and not perfect reads. No matter what your opponent's combat reveal might tell you about their hand at that time, it's incomplete information. Every turn, they're going to draw a new card. They might have drawn the very card you knew they didn't have because of their combat reveal. Or better yet, they might be actively misleading you by combat revealing cards that conceal the true contents of their hand. Forget frame traps. What about valuation traps, son? Use this skill to pick the cards in your hand that you're going to play and to make guesses about your opponent's hand. Valuation is the cornerstone of getting good. Once your valuation is on point and refined, and you're using it to read your opponent's hand, that's when you need to start building another skill, reading your opponent's mind. We are who we are, and our identities shape how we express ourselves. We might be risk-averse or risk-takers. We might like to play aggressively or prefer a more passive approach. Valuation is the thing we share in common. You and I and everyone else in the world is going to agree that a 7th throw is always better than an 8th throw if neither have abilities on them. Valuation puts the tools in your hand to build a model of your opponent's hand. You can say things like, you probably don't have any face cards or aces, or you don't have a throw faster than 8.6. Yomi is when you take that model and then use it to build a model of your opponent's mind. Oh, you like to play the most unlikely combat option. Therefore, you're going to play the 8th throw I know you have, rather than the 3 aces you just powered up for. So if you want to get beyond good and get great, play a lot of opponents and work on your Yomi. But you can't get there without strong valuation first. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions about this concept or anything else in this series, leave a comment. I'm happy to discuss it. This isn't the last time we're going to be talking about valuation. This is a foundational concept, as I mentioned. So everything that we're going to touch on from now on is in some way going to be based on the understanding of this concept that we covered today. Thanks again for watching. It's been a true pleasure to have people that are new to the game and are discovering it thanks to Steam, giving this a lot of views and a lot of love. I really appreciate every view, every comment, every like. It really makes me incredibly happy to be putting something like this together and seeing that people are enjoying it and that they're finding it useful. As you can probably tell, my goal is to release one of these a week. If you have any suggestions for a topic, or there's anything in particular you'd like to see me talk about, or you just want to chat about Yomi, either leave a comment here or find me on fantasystrike.com in the forums, send me a private message or start a thread in the Yomi subforum. My name is Mystic Juicer, and as always, enjoy yourself some Yomi.